Well, I am here today with Mordecai Jasper. Thank you for being on the podcast, Mordecai.
My privilege, my pleasure. Good to be here.
So Mordecai has known me for a very long time. So, I don't even know how old I was when you met my parents, but I was very young.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mordecai and his wife, Ebony, have been a part of our family, our group of family friends for many years. My dad was a pastor, and Mordecai would come sometimes and preach when Dad was taking a Sunday off. That didn't even mean we were leaving town. Sometimes my dad just had you come preach, and he would sit and listen.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, because he wanted to.
He had no problem sharing his pulpit.
Well, that's true, actually. That's very true. And Mordecai did my mom's service when she passed away last year. So definitely a close connection there. But I wanted to talk to Mordecai about an interesting thing that he said to me when I was a teenager, but we'll get there. Mordecai, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm an electrical engineer by training. I went to the little school, West Virginia Institute of Technology in Montgomery, West Virginia. And I moved out to Las Vegas, got a job with an engineering firm, and I've been with that engineering firm just under 38 years now, and I'll be retiring in April after 39 years and 14 days. I was ordained, not that I'm counting, but I was ordained as a pastor, a lay pastor in 1987, and have served in various capacities from the associate pastors, youth pastor, senior pastor, and now I'm in the phase where I'm pretty much a lay teaching, counseling pastor at my church now.
Yeah. And so you have kind of that very an eclectic perspective on the church because you've served in so many roles. I feel. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Now we're going to discuss relationships today. So we're going to discuss finding healthy relationships. And this is one of those things where I had an idea of what I wanted to talk about when I asked you to be on the podcast. And then as you and I talked in our preliminary phone call, it just became very evident what God wanted us to talk about. And that was healthy relationships. Before we dive in, can you share with us about your family growing up?
Let's see. My family growing up, I was the 10th of 18 children born in my family. And so I think the oldest was 20 years older than me, and the youngest is 20 years younger than me. So that's the span of my dad had 3 children before he married my mom. And so lots of siblings. When you have that many siblings, I was truly closest to 3 of them, or 2 of them rather, because we were all pretty much close in age. My brother David was 2 years older. My brother Mark was 4 years older. I had the strongest relationship with them just because we were together, the proximity of and my younger siblings were further behind me. Okay. And then I moved out west. So that's, and then my parents died when I was really young. My dad died when I was 5. My mom died when I was 12. So my grandmother raised us and grew up going to church. Grew up knowing that God wanted us to relate to people and treat people a certain way. And that's pretty much what happened until I got older and realized that, even the things God wanted me to do, I couldn't do because there were just things that I had learned that were wrong that I had to rethink and stop doing.
Mm. Okay, so let's go kind of there about, having to relearn. Let's talk about what would your definition be of a healthy relationship?
A healthy relationship, in my mind, would be one in which the 2 people are looking at each other and they're choosing to relate to each other in a manner that is not influenced by anything negative from their past. And by that, I mean, you can have a person who came from a family in which there was a dysfunction. There was a problem in the way of a bad, just something in the way of a bad trait. That could have been addiction, abuse, neglect, a bad temper. If you live in that kind of environment, you pretty much learn to survive. You don't learn to relate, you learn to survive. If your alcoholic father comes home and your first thing to do is to get out of the way and not be the target that evening. If you've got an abusive father that you want to not be the target. So you pretty much learn to shelter in place, so to speak. You go hide. And so if you grow up that way and then you finally get out into the world and you start interacting with people, if that's how you learn to relate to people by, let's say, for instance, you're in an environment where screaming and yelling was a norm, and you take anyone that you're interacting with, if their tone goes up even the slightest little bit, you perceive that as yelling and screaming, and you withdraw and you go into your little shell and you don't communicate anymore. So there are lots of things that happen within families that lead people to be dysfunctional, and helping people recognize that, okay, you reacted to that situation not because you're choosing to. You're reacting to that situation because that's what your family taught you to do. That's how your family dynamic worked. But you're not in that family anymore. You're now with a new person. You can look at this person. He is not your father. She is not your mother. Don't think of them that way. Don't relate to them as if they're that way. And so, getting people to understand those things is really essential if they're ever going to have a healthy relationship, because it's almost as if you're reacting to a situation and you're not giving it any thought. It's your program response.
Yeah.
And that program response is not healthy, because I've had lots of couples that I've done counseling with, and the guy would say something along the lines of, but she looks at me and acts as if I'm the person who did all these things to her in the past. And I didn't do any of those things to her in the past.
Yeah.
But yet she sees me, she's projecting the relationship onto me, and that's unhealthy. And so if you can get them to recognize when they're acting and behaving that way, and to know that they can choose not to. And that's why one of the books I use for my counseling addresses that issue. It's called Love is a Choice. You don't love people because you have to. You love people because you choose to. If you love them because you have to, if that's your mindset, it can become very burdensome, and it can become something you're really bitter about. But if you love them because you choose to, that's a good thing. If I choose to do something, that means I'm going to enjoy it. I'm doing it because there's mutual. There's something I'm going to get out of it, and there's something the other person's going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I've spent the last 37 years as a pastor in this town, primarily focused on that, helping people understand how their family of origin and the way they were raised, the way they were treated, the relational dynamics in those families are harming them today, because no family's perfect.
Yeah.
Nobody had perfect parents. Nobody had perfect siblings. So we all bring into every relationship a little bit of baggage from our past, from our family. And we've got to learn how to process that baggage and hopefully set it aside and going to have really healthy, meaningful relationships.
Yeah. You're not just talking about romantic relationships here. You're talking about friendships as well.
We're talking about friendships. We're talking about just in general learning how to relate to people, so that they respect you, you respect them. The Bible talks about being able to look at others as being better than yourself, and looking at pleasing people, a husband pleasing his wife, the wife pleasing her husband. But the bigger thing is just in being friends. I mean, if you're going to find a good friend, you need to be able to pick. You need to be able to, once you're healthy, you can understand and realize or recognize, healthy people. And you do that by you establishing what I consider to be boundaries. This is what is acceptable treatment. This is an acceptable way you can relate to me. And if you don't want to relate to me in this manner, then this is kind of harsh, but there's a door and you can leave. As I like to remind people, there's 7 billion plus people on the planet. In my lifetime, I might run across 1 million of them where I may have contact with them or so. And of that million or so, maybe I'll get to know maybe 1,000 of them, really get to know them over the course of my lifetime. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's 1,000 people out of a 7 billion plus that I really get to know, spend time with, have been in their homes, have really had a meaningful relationship with them. So that's what it's about. It's trying to find those individuals and having those really meaningful relationships that can span your entire lifetime.
So what you're saying is, if you have a dysfunctional relationship with one person, it's maybe not worth them taking up one of those spots of the 1,000 people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That makes sense. You said to me when we were talking, you were like, because let's face it, whether you want to admit it or not, every family is dysfunctional.
Mhm.
And which
Absolutely.
I mean, I agree. I think we all have dysfunctions that we don't even realize are going on, or are here. And then, of course, whatever's here comes here. So we don't
Mhm.
realize those dysfunctions that are in our lives because a lot of them were they were there from the beginning. So
Yes.
we didn't choose them. It was taught to us. It was what happened in our household. So can you describe um, what you mean by like every family's dysfunctional? You know, even the families that are like,
Okay.
good. And then what does it mean for us as we step out of our family? You've kind of already touched on it, but just kind of go a little more specific. What does it mean as we step out of our family into the world with our own dysfunction meeting people that have their dysfunction?
Okay. So think of it from this perspective. You've got two different people who were raised in two different families.
Mm-hmm.
How they raise their children is different potentially. How they discipline their children, how the husband and wife related to each other, how the husband and wife relate to their children. One family does it one way, one family does it a different way. For instance, one family is very heavy-handed and very disciplined, and you're going to do it
Yeah.
by the book. If you don't do it by the book, then the wrath of dad's going to come down upon you.
Yeah.
And so that person is living in a world where it's very structured, but also very tension filled.
Okay.
On the other hand, you've got a situation where a person's in a family and the family is very fun loving, they're very carefree, they're very going. It's kind of like um, anything goes, to be happy. Um, you would almost consider them so carefree that there's not a lot of discipline. The children can pretty much do whatever they want.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, well, boys will be boys, girls will be girls. Well, then those two individuals from those families meet. And so this one person has this dynamic where they've learned to do things this way, this other person's done it this way. Neither one of them was right. You don't want to be too heavy-handed as a parent, and you don't want to be too lenient as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
There's a median where you get a healthy child. And so what happens in that case is you've got different relational dynamics that come out of it. The different communication skills come out of it. You've got one family where it's so strict and disciplined that communication is just not happening.
Mm-hmm.
These are the rules. There's no discussion. Over here is talk, 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 because they talk to express themselves or whatever. So when it comes to that, you've got two different folks that are meeting, and in the dating process, everything's fine because everything's perfect when you're dating. You can overlook all kind of things when you're dating. But then once you
Right.
get married, you're kind of stuck. Or if you want to be friends long term with the person, you've got to deal with those. How do you reconcile the fact that you've got a person that you can't reach out to without that person withdrawing from you because they came from a situation where they were abused,
Mm.
but they've never told anybody they were abused. But you reach toward them and they withdraw. It's like, well, why did you do that? I would never hurt you. I mean, that's just not practical. Why would you even? And then you end up finding out something that you didn't know was something from their family.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what ends up happening is you interacting with people, and either they are heavily rule based, very few rules, or there is a dominant mother who's ruling the house, or a dominant dad who's ruling the house,
Mm-hmm.
and the dominant dad, the son becomes the dominant male.
Yeah.
Dominant mother, the woman becomes the children, the ladies become dominant in the family, and you bring two dominant personalities together. Well, that's going to be a really great fight to see how that's going to work out. I counseled a couple one time, and when we finished our study, the personality traits were he was a passive. His relational style was passive. He was one who would avoid conflict. Her relational style is one of being combative, wanting to win the conversation, win the battle every time. And so what ended up happening for them was she would want to fight, and he would cave, and she would get her way, and that went for a while. But every time he gave in, it just made him angrier and
Yeah.
angrier and angrier inside until one day he blows up.
Mm.
Now she's been getting her way all this time, and then one day, after it could be months, it could be years, he erupts over something that is petty as you can think of
Yeah.
at that instance. But the accumulation of having been put down and stomped on for so many periods of time, or so many different instances, he finally erupts and explodes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've got this huge fight on their hands that they've never had to deal with because she's always gotten her way. And
Yeah.
so you try to help people be aware of that. And if you can figure that out in the dating process, I try to do it with premarital counseling. We try to help them see that before they get married. But once they've gotten married, then you've got to take them, bring them back, and start them all over, as if you're doing premarital counseling, except they're married and you're trying to help them solve their problems. So that's kind of the thing when I say that every family is dysfunctional in some way or another. Is there are certain traits that prevail that lead to behaviors that down the road conflict with the family from a different
Yeah.
baseline, so to speak.
Yeah. I can see premarital counseling being really beneficial. I know it was beneficial for Jeff and I in talking through some things that really just having someone in front of us saying, have you discussed X, Y, and Z? And us
Hmm.
saying, ooh, no, we haven't talked about that. So that we were able to have those discussions before we went into the marriage. And
Hmm.
I mean, I highly suggest anyone does this with premarital counseling, but there isn't this type of counseling for friendships. There isn't this type of counseling when you're dating someone or when you're like stepping into the world. I mean, there is, but you have to, I guess, seek it out. How can we figure out where those blind spots are in our life, or those maybe we just realize that, like, relationships around us aren't going the way that we think it is. And I just heard a quote from The Office. It was like, if you can't point out the Michael Scott in your office, then you're probably Michael Scott,
Hmm.
and but in a way, it's kind of like if all of your relationships are going south and it's literally all your relationships, you have to start looking internally. Is it me that
Yes.
is causing these relationships to break? So how do we identify those blind spots within ourselves, those biases, whatever they might be, those heartbreaks, before things completely implode?
I would suggest the first thing you want to think about is, what do you deem personally to be acceptable with regard to how you want to be treated in a friendship? What do you want? How do you want your friends to think of you? How do you want your friends to talk to you? Um, how much time do you think your friendship should take? I mean, how much interest should the other person have in wanting to be with you for friendship? Um, I found that over the course of getting to be friends with people, we spend a lot of time talking.
Mm.
And in the course of talking, we talked about, well, what's your family like? What's my family like? And when I was in college, it was interesting because you meet people when you're in college, and you meet people that come from different socioeconomic groups. You meet people that come from different ethnic groups. And in some instances, you meet people who come from an ethnic group in which they've never dealt with any other ethnic groups. There were no,
Mm.
for instance, there were counties in West Virginia where there were no Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people from those counties came and interacted with people at college, in some cases, it was really their first interaction with people of a different ethnic group. So at that point, you've got to bridge that gap to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you get past that point, if you want to be truly good friends with someone, you've got to be somewhat transparent. You've got to be able to talk to them. They got to be open to talk to you. You've got to be able to love them and trust them enough that if they see you do something or behave in a way that isn't like right, from my perspective, the right was, if I'm a Christian, then there's certain things I should do as a Christian. There's a certain way I should react as a Christian, behave as a Christian. Those friends were basically caring enough that if they saw me doing something that wasn't appropriate, they would tell me,
Yeah.
well, you shouldn't have done that. And then I would think, well, why did I do that? And it kind of forced me to kind of take a look at myself. And at the same time, they gave me the freedom to take a look at them and say, okay, well, why are you doing that?
Hmm.
Why did you do that sort of thing? So we pretty much kind of agreed we were going to walk through life together, and we would strengthen each other by the association. It would be meaningful to each of us, but it meant that we would spend time with each other. It meant that we spent time with each other's family. For the most part, it was me, because my family was. I don't know how it happened. Most of my friends, very few of them ever met my family, because they met my brother. Some of them met some of my siblings because they either came to school with me or they came to watch me play sports. But I tended to be the one who went to meet other people's families and got to know them. And so over time, you get to know I guess you could say some family secrets or some family behaviors that you go, wait a minute, well, that's kind of odd. And it's like you and I talked before about my one friend I met from school. He invited me to come live with him for the summer.
Okay.
And he and I were best of buddies at school. I mean, he was 2 years behind me, and we got to know each other really well. And he came from a county where there weren't any Black people living, and he invited me to go home with him, to live with him for the summer. And I'm thinking, okay, free room and board, I can live with that. I have no problem with that. He neglected to tell me that his dad was somewhat of a bigot. And so I don't know if he did that because he was trying to help get his father to change the way he was, or he just was ignorant and he just thought, well, I just want you to come and whatever happens kind of happens.
Yeah.
And so I went and I lived with him for 3 months. And he was right. It didn't take long to figure out that his dad was a bigot. He would say things that were like, whoa, that was pretty close. I mean, rather painful, but his mom would tell his dad to be quiet whenever she would catch him and say, shush. And I mean, whoa, time, stop. That's not acceptable. She goes, what do you mean? I said, look, this is his home. I'm a guest in his home. I can't change him. That's not my problem. If that's the way he is, I don't want you to tell him to not be the person he is. I will respect his right to be the person he is. And I won't take it personally because I know his son. I love his son. He and his son are really good friends. We're going to be friends for the rest of our lives. And I'm hoping over time, he will accept that. And as it turned out, over the course of those 3 months together, he and I spent a lot of time together. And by the time that 3 months was over, I went back to college and I became a player on our college basketball team. And I was a starter. And he actually came to every one of my college basketball games for the next 2 years. At every home game, he came to my games. At any home game, any away game that was close to where he lived, he came to those games. And over time, he effectively went from being a bigot to being my surrogate dad. I mean, that's what changed because of his son introducing me to him and to his family. And I effectively became a member of their family. And so the son knew there was something that wasn't quite right. He didn't agree with it, but he couldn't change it. He couldn't influence his dad. So he let me do it. And when I left home to come here to Nevada, that man and I sat down together and we rehashed everything that led to him telling me when I left West Virginia that if I needed anything, any time of the day, at any point to call him, he would either be there for me or he would give me what I needed if I had a challenge when I was in Las Vegas, Nevada. So getting to know people, and the more time you spend with them, the more open and honest you are with each other. You can kind of learn what the problems are, what the challenges are that people are dealing with in their families. And then the really amazing families don't try to hide it when you are around them. There's some that do. They put it on their public face.
Yeah.
And then for those, I've always found it fun because I serve a lot in my church, and one of my favorite areas to serve in church is in children's ministry.
Okay.
And if you want to learn the truth about a family, just serve in children's ministry because children have no filter.
None.
They will tell you what's happening in their family.
Yeah.
Whether mom and dad are fighting, whether mom and dad are not talking to each other, they have no problem. So you kind of get to know those sorts of things. And the neatest thing is children pretty much will say stuff. We were sitting at dinner with a couple one time, and out of nowhere, the 7-year-old, 8-year-old child says, "I hate it when dad makes mom cry." Right in the middle of the conversation. I'm thinking, okay, I'll bite. Well, and I looked at the little kid and I said, well, when was the last time this happened? And she says, well, it happened. And she told me the date. And I went, okay. And I looked at her mom and dad and I said, okay, I think we might need to talk when this time is over because apparently there's a problem.
Yeah.
And if it's enough where your child just told me about it, then the three of us need to have a conversation. And we were really good friends and we were able to sit down and talk about what was going on. And so the best thing from my perspective is you need to understand how you want to be treated, and you can't make that negotiable. They have to treat you with respect. They have to treat you. But the challenge with that one is most people learn to be treated the way they were treated by their parents. So most women will accept any behavior that their dad showed toward them. That's their normal going in position when it comes to relating to men.
Yeah.
And the same thing with women. Men will treat women the way they say how their father treat their mom. Women will allow themselves to be treated the way their dad treated their mother, and the mother accepted that behavior. if they were really decent people, then that's a good thing. But if those were bad things that they had to cope with, then you'll run across a person who doesn't think they deserve to be treated with love and care and respect because they never had. It's totally unnatural. It wasn't normal for them.
Mm-hmm.
They were used to being treated poorly.
Yeah.
And then they finally meet someone who wants to treat them with respect, and they freak out. They have no idea what to do with that.
Yeah.
Because it makes the whole new set of emotions pops up that they can't deal with.
Yeah. I hear you saying that, we need to have expectations of how we want to be treated so that we kind of have those in our mind. I think having that, like, expectations of how you want to be treated also means that you have to face how you've been treated in the past.
Yes.
I hear you saying you also need to kind of find out from your friends, like, maybe not through like flat out, what are your expectations in this friendship? But you might with your closest friends have a conversation like that, but really kind of listening, being a good listener and engaging in that conversation, listening to them. You put yourself in a situation, however, where you were in the home of that friend and he was not treating you the way I'm sure that you would have said, I want to be treated. But you stayed. You didn't say, peace, I'm out. And
well, my friend treated me fine. His father.
No, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. His father. You didn't say, peace, I'm out. You didn't even like, in fact, you said, no, whatever he's going to say is whatever he's going to say. I don't feel like that's a response for most people. It's, this is how I want to be treated. If you don't treat me like with that, I'm done. So where do you find the balance between you're not, I'm in this situation and this person, you were in his home, but I could see this happening in a school situation. I could see this happening in a work situation. There's a person there that has an opinion about you that's maybe not true, or is responding in a certain way that you're like, that is not how I would want to be treated. And you have two choices of like acting out, which I think a lot of people are choosing to do, talk about it on social media and just be so angry, or to respond graciously. When is the time to do those things when you're thinking about, I only want to surround myself with healthy people? When's the time to speak out, and when is the time to say, you are who you are and I'm going to accept you for who you are?
Well, I think it's from my perspective, it boils down to how meaningful I think that relationship could be.
Okay.
When it comes to my people that I work with, if it's a person that, I can get along with anyone. I can work with anyone. That's not a problem. I have worked with literally thousands of people over the course of my career, and not all of them are people that I'm really great friends with.
Mm-hmm.
They're more acquaintances.
Okay.
And within that group, I would say there's a very small percentage of people that I've ever worked with that I've ever spent time with them away from work.
Mm.
And that small percentage that I've spent time away from work with, those people, we have been friends for pretty much 25, actually 30 plus years now.
Okay.
And even though some of them have retired from work, we're still in contact with each other.
Yeah.
Because in the course of interacting with those people, they cared for me in the way I wanted to be cared for. They respected me for the person that I was. They respected themselves. All the things that you would think of as far as biases that they may have had toward this activity or this person or that person, they never manifested themselves with me. They treated me with great respect. Mm-hmm. They welcomed me into their lives in ways that were very unique from the standpoint of either counseling or being a trustee for them, being someone who, one of my friends that I work with, I'm the power of attorney.
Oh, okay.
For her.
Okay.
And she's a coworker that's a really dear friend. And she approached me one day and she asked me, would you do this for me? And I said, of course. If you should become incapacitated, I would make sure you're taken care of. Mm. So you have to understand that for me, the biggest thing is I look at people in general and I think people are broken because they are. When we talk about dysfunction, every person is broken in some way or another. And so broken people will act like broken people, or as my pastor would say, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
So I look at people and I think, okay, you're broken, you have issues, because everybody who's broken has issues. Some are aware of those issues and are trying to deal with them. So I look at everybody and I try my best to accept the fact that, okay, you have issues and you're not going to try to deal with any of them. Then when I finally meet a person who recognizes they have issues and they're willing to try to address those, and they're willing to allow me to be a part of the process of them addressing those issues, as well as them being a blessing to me at the same time, then there's a potential for that to become a really great friendship. And it's just like college. I had a lot of really, really close friends in college, a lot of people I knew. I was a very popular person when I was in college. But when I left college, there's only probably maybe 12 people that I left college with that I have been in contact with ever since we left college. And of those 12, probably 8 of 9 of them, I mean, literally every home they've ever lived in, I've been in.
Yeah.
Their children, I've watched their children grow up, and I've officiated one of their children's weddings. Their children look at me as being their uncle, as their mom's brother or sister, their dad's brother, so to speak. So it's just a matter of choice. I laid down what I was expecting from people. I was very upfront about what I was offering in the way of friendship. I was very upfront as far as what I didn't want. I wasn't out for having, as they say nowadays, friends with benefits. No, I didn't want friends with benefits, so to speak. The Bible says I should look at older women as mothers. I should look at younger women as sisters. And that's kind of the way I've walked through life, is looking at people, okay? And having done that, I'm probably closer to some of my friends who are female, who are just more closer. I'm probably closer to them in some cases as a sister than I am with my own natural born, my siblings. Okay. And that's mainly because I've spent more time with these other people, my friends, than I have with my family.
Right.
Because I went to college and I met these people. I moved away from home, and I've seen them probably as much, if not more, than I've seen my family, my siblings, when I was growing up. Right. Because mainly I had more in common with these other people. Yeah. My siblings were much younger than me, were further behind. And so I pretty much had in mind what I wanted. And if a person met that criteria, then I pursued that relationship further. If they didn't, I walked away from that situation. And I found my fair share of friends over the course of time. Yeah. By doing it that way. And it's been a blessing. I mean, we've invited people into our lives. They've invited us into their lives. And we've got a really great support system, and because of that. And I think that's one of the things that people don't quite understand is I don't think people value relationships, whether with their friends or their marriage. I don't think they value them nearly as much as they should, because if they did, they would take much better care of them. They would invest more in them. Yeah. And the world would be different. Yeah. Or at least their world would be different.
Mm-hmm. You seem to handle these with a lot of grace of a close friend and not close friend, an acquaintance. You are a broken person. We're all broken. And therefore, those things you've said or those things you've done, I know it's because of your brokenness. And then it sounds to me like you get to choose how you react in that situation instead of jumping at it and being angry first. You're choosing to see them through the eyes of Christ, and then Absolutely. Allowing that, the same kind of grace that we received from Christ to help you respond to them. Now, there comes a point where you're going to have to draw boundaries, and you talked a little bit about it. And I know that you use, when you're doing counseling, you use those 2 books, Love is a Choice, and then you use the Boundaries book, correct?
Yes.
So where does drawing a boundary come into play? Because I'm sure there's a point where you can treat them with grace and love them and still have them in your peripheral, but then when does it come that you're like, okay, I need to draw a really hard boundary? Because that can be really difficult sometimes.
Yes, the book is called Boundaries. It's by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And it's the description says, learning when to say yes and when to say no, so that you can have healthy relationships.
Mm.
And so a really hard boundary for me would be, for instance, is peer pressure. When I was growing up, there was a lot of peer pressure, and there were certain things that I said, okay, I'm just not going to do. And you're not going to force me to do them. You're not going to make me. If once I set this as my way of looking at a situation, it's non-negotiable. And one boundary would be, I won't do anything that you expect me to do just to fit in. And for instance, we were being trained when I was going to college. We took some classes on how to behave when we got to a professional environment. And I thought, okay, fine. And they said, well, you need to not do anything that's going to make you stand out. So I'm thinking, so what do you mean by that? They says, well, if they're drinking, then even if you don't want to drink, you should get the drink and just sit in front of you. And I went, no, if I'm out at a business dinner and someone's paying for it, I'm going to enjoy myself. So I will get what I think is appropriate. And they went, well, that's not going to be good for you. And I went, okay, fine. I'll do it my way. You do it your way, and we'll see what happens.
Did they pay attention that you're going to stand out in any crowd? How tall are you?
I'm 6'6".
Yeah, so you're going to stand out. You're going to stand out in the crowd anyway.
That part they did. They wanted me to fit in from the standpoint of doing what everybody else did.
Okay.
And so if everybody else drank, then I should drink. Okay. If everybody else was behaving in a certain way, then I should not stand out. I should go along with the crowd. And I go, no, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to treat people. If you expect me to treat you that way, then that's just not going to work. I'm not going to be rude to you. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to treat you like the other guys do. Yeah. I mean, on a college campus, there are lots of folks who treated people in certain ways. And I'm thinking, no, I respect them enough to not objectify them. They're human beings from that perspective, and they deserve respect. So from the boundary perspective, saying no to I'm not going to drink, saying no to I'm not going to party. And I have a hard time with people who think, well, I had a great time last night. I'm thinking, you know what? I'm curious. How did you get back to your room last night? I don't know. How did you get undressed last night? I don't remember. I do. I remember how I got back to my room last night. I remember how I got dressed last night. I wonder what happened with you. You have no clue. So one of those things was I will not behave that way. I will not live that way. One of my boundaries was I get to decide who gets to be in my life. I get to decide who I want to be friends with. I get to decide who I want to associate with. And you can't make me associate with anyone. You can't make me not do something. Yeah. It's just like when I got married. My wife is Russian. She's a Russian American. And so there were people who thought that was inappropriate, that I should marry someone who was of a different ethnic group. And I'm thinking, I don't care about your opinion. My boundary was pretty simple. God said, if you're going to marry, you're a Christian, you should marry another Christian. Yeah. There's nothing in the Bible that says what color that Christian should be. They could be pink as far as God's concerned. If all they're a godly person, I can marry that person. And yet there are people who thought they had an opinion and could weigh in on that opinion. And I thought, no, you don't get to tell me who I'm going to marry. You don't get to tell me who my friends are going to be. You don't get to tell me what I'm going to do as far as how I go about my job. My boss can tell me what to do, but you can't. Just not anybody gets an opinion. Mm-hmm. And so one of those boundaries was respecting people's opinions, but only valuing those who truly cared about me, who really cared and loved me. Those opinions mattered more. Yeah. So that was a boundary I put up, is to make sure that I only had around me people that cared enough to be interested in my well-being.
And what do you do when you set that boundary and people push against that?
If they push against it too much, I walk away. They're no longer a part of my life. Yeah. Most of the people that I've met, for the most part, like I said, I've got enough friends. I mean, I would say more so than the average person. I'm very keen on relationships and participating in relationships. So, and living in a town where there's lots of transition, people come and go pretty frequently in Nevada. I was at a church when I first started pastoring that we were at the military base. And so every 4 years, people came and went. And so you get to meet people, love people, and then you move on and you stay in contact with those people, and those relationships continue to grow. So the idea is, you have to set a boundary on what's acceptable treatment. like I tell people, what you allow to happen in dating will happen in marriage. If you're being abused in dating, you're going to get abused when you're married. If your
Mm-hmm.
person is drinking to excess when they're dating, that's not going to stop. When they get married, they're probably going to drink to excess at that point. That's just going
Yeah.
to continue.
Yeah.
So you've got to decide what is acceptable. Um, One of the things also is as far as a boundary, I'm not responsible for other people's emotions.
Ooh,
I'm
yeah.
not responsible for other people's reactions to things. I'm only responsible for me. So if I say something to someone and it hurts their feelings, as long as it was well intended and it's something they needed to hear and they just didn't want to hear it, I don't regret that. I don't feel bad about it. Um, but I'm free to let people be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a boundary. My only challenge in life is being the best me that I can be, and encouraging others to be the best that they can be. But I offer advice. I don't dictate. I offer advice when I'm counseling. I offer books to read. I offer support when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to them helping implement what's in those books. But other than that, it's um, it's on them.
Yeah, and
I,
it sounds to me like you're like, I need to be who I need to be. You
mhm,
need to be who you need to be. But that may not work in the same space.
true.
Yeah. And so it's
Mhm,
okay. You're not telling them that they're wrong. You're not telling them that, you are a bad person. But what you're saying is I have to draw these boundaries for me, or for a listener, they have to draw boundaries with their family or with their children. And if you can't follow those boundaries, okay, that's fine. But it just means that we're going to have to cease being friends or having a relationship with you, that type of thing. What does that look like though? Okay, so dating, you can be like, we're just different people. It's me, not you.
mhm.
That type of thing, and draw that boundary. What if though we talked about dysfunctional families. Let's say you come out of your family, you begin to realize some of that dysfunction that's present. Your family doesn't leave. You can say to your friends, like, I love you, but we're just going to need to not spend as much time together.
Mhm.
You can't say that with your families. What do you do? How do you have those conversations about boundaries with parents or aunts and uncles, grandma, grandpas, brothers, sisters, uh, when you can't say, I just don't want to ever see you again? I mean, I guess you could, but.
Well, in some cases, that's what ends up happening. You can find it where people, if you have the overbearing mother or father, and effectively what you end up doing is they distance from each other.
Mm,
You have people who just don't spend time with each other.
mm-hmm.
I've counseled people and interacted with people. I went through the value series with a couple one time with the group at my church, I should say. And one of the ladies in the class basically said that she had set some boundaries for her children and how they should react and behave and be treated. And her mother and father disagreed.
Wow.
And so they didn't want her. They thought she was too strict of a parent, and they disagreed in what should happen with the grandchildren when they had the grandchildren.
Mm,
Well, the daughter finally got to the point of saying, I'm tired of my children coming back from with you and coming back to me, and me having to retrain them on how to behave in my family because you let them go goofy for the weekend or for the week. And
mm.
so she finally said, either you do it the way I want to do it, or you just don't get to see my grandchildren. Will just stop interacting with you. And she basically stopped, went cold turkey, and did not interact with them for 6 months.
Wow.
And she gave them 6 months to think about it. Do they want to see their grandchildren? If they want to see their grandchildren, they will treat them they will interact with them the way she wants them to interact with them, and not the way they did. And after 6 months, the grandparents, her mom and dad, agreed with her and said, okay, we'll do it your way. And so that's what needs to happen. And in some cases, you have it to where you need a third party to tell that person to back off. And that happened at a wedding. I was doing a wedding, and the bride's mom and dad had been divorced, and the mom was really overbearing and really making the wedding, which should have been a joyful occasion, she was making it miserable.
Mm,
And the bride came to me and says, could you help me with this? And I said, absolutely. I would definitely help you with this. So during the wedding, there came a part where I looked at everybody and I said, look, standing before me are two adults. They've just formed their own family. At this point, they're recognized by the state of Nevada as being grown-ups. And basically, let me put it this way. If they want your advice, they'll ask you for it. But if
yeah.
they don't want your advice, keep your mouth shut. They don't need to hear it. Just keep your opinions to yourself. And oh, by the way, they are their own family now. So if they are they get to have their own traditions. So if they want to come and visit you or go and visit them, that's their choice. You don't get to dictate to them any of these decisions anymore. That's on them. And the mother, when she heard this, she was really mad at me when I was saying that. And once the wedding was over, during the reception, she walked up to me and she said, Pastor, I was really angry with you as you said what you said about leaving them alone and not interfering with their relationship and respecting their marriage. But I needed to hear it.
Yeah.
And I promise you, I will do my best to fix this. I will do better with regard to not being so overbearing to my daughter and my son-in-law. So it took a third party to help that situation work its way out.
Yeah.
But that's why you have the situation with a lot of families where the children and the parents aren't connected.
Yeah.
Because the boundaries weren't recognized. They were there in place and they were taken advantage of, so to speak. And they just don't relate.
Yeah.
And there are lots of families in the world today where the children and the parents aren't close.
Yeah.
They don't have a relationship.
Right. And either because that boundary was drawn or because there was no boundaries drawn and therefore hurt and guilt and all of anger kind of piled on top of each other, creating a whole nother wall between the relationship.
Yep.
And now that relationship is broken. I think probably some people hear what you're saying about drawing a boundary and it scares them because they're like, oh, I want to draw that boundary, but I don't know how people are going to react. And I think other people probably are hearing you can draw that boundary and it's actually empowering to them because they think, oh, I've been wanting someone to give me permission for so long to draw a boundary. And what you're saying is you have permission. You have permission to like create those boundaries within your life and then expect other people to follow those and respect those. So I'm sure you're getting some people that are listening are like, oh, thank you, Mordecai, for giving me that permission.
Well, I would recommend your listeners that they buy the book, Love is a Choice by Dr. Robert Hempfeld, Frank Minert, and Paul Meyer, and just read it.
Okay.
Because as you and I talked, I had a couple of years ago that had a really good marriage and they just wanted to see if they could make it better. And so he read Boundaries, and she read Love is a Choice or one or the other, but Love is Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. And they came back to me 6 weeks later. We got together, saying we talked, and they were like, oh my goodness, we've learned so much about ourselves and we've learned so much about how to have a better marriage by reading these two books. And so they're mandatory reading for anybody I do premarital counseling for, and they're mandatory reading for anybody who comes to me for counseling who just wants to understand how to go about having a healthier perspective of themselves and a healthy and learning how to recognize and have healthy relationships. They're essential from my perspective.
Yeah.
For anybody who wants to just have better relationships, have a better marriage, have better friendships. But I have to warn them, the books can be very painful because most of the people that I have read the books usually put them down about halfway through because they really don't want to think in the terms that the book would like them to think, which is getting them to change what they're seeing and thinking about things. And then they go back. The second half of the books tend to be, okay, now here's what you're going to do with the information you've gained, how this is going to help you. And so I would highly recommend that they buy the two books. You can get audio versions. If you're a guy who doesn't want to read, you can just listen to it. I assure you they're life-changing. They are life-changing books that will make you be able to recognize and value relationships. Like I said, I have friendships that they're just amazing. By help, but it's just amazing how much it works out. And I'll give you just one last thing to show you just how wonderful it is when you have healthy relationships. Years ago, I had to have heart surgery. I had to have emergency heart surgery, and my wife was at the hospital, and it was going to be 5 or 6 hours for them to put my 7 bypasses in, which they didn't know. They just had to open me up and decide how many bypasses they were going to put in. But as I was going into surgery, one of the nurses that was taking me back asked me, she goes, well, who are you? And I go, what do you mean, who am I? I've got a tag on my arm. It says I'm Mordecai Jasper. That's who I am. She goes, no. What do you do? I go, well, I'm an engineer. I'm a pastor. I don't understand. What's the problem? She goes, well, there are a lot of people here. I go, what do you mean there's a lot of people here? Well, there's a lot of people in the waiting room with your wife. I go, oh yeah, I forgot about that part. I'm a pastor, and I've been a pastor in this town for 25 years, and I've been a pastor of several different churches. I've got a lot of friends, so probably a few of my friends are outside. She goes, no, not a few of your friends. She says there are enough people that they're disrupting the operation of our hospital
Oh,
that are with your wife right now. And I'm like, ooh, that's not good. So, okay, you can tell my wife to go tell my friends to kind of mellow out or whatever, but that's how many people turned out to support us,
mm,
to support Ebony when I went in for heart surgery. And that was because of the work and the privilege we've had of being involved in friendships and relationships with people for 30 plus years in this valley. And that's the blessing I think people are missing out on. I
mm.
mean, even my Swedish daughter, who was on the East Coast when I was recovering from surgery, she was only planning to be on the East Coast. She flew to Las Vegas just to make sure I was okay.
Wow.
And we'd only known each other, what, 10 years? We met in 2000. So we'd only known each other 10 years. And even
Mm,
she cared enough to get on an airplane and fly from the East Coast and come and make sure I was here and spend a week with me here in Las Vegas to make sure I was okay.
yeah.
So meaningful relationships, I just think people don't understand just how valuable they are and how precious and what a blessing they are.
Hmm.
And they do require some work, but it's worth the effort.
Yeah.
And so I hope your readers will read the books
Yeah.
and or your listeners rather will read the books, and they'll be blessed.
Yeah.
They will absolutely be blessed.
And we'll put those on the show notes so that people can click on those, have an easy link to go and purchase those. I have one more story, one more thing that I want to ask you. And this is my personal, guess you don't remember saying this to me, but we were sitting in Vegas. We were visiting my family who lives there, and you were there as well. And I was in the dating process, probably in
Mm-hmm.
college. And I don't know why someone asked this question, but someone asked my dad. They said, would you have an issue if Courtney dated a black man? And, my dad was like, no, my dad's a lover, right? And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I wouldn't have a problem. That wouldn't be a big deal at all. And you said, I'd have an issue. And the room went silent. Like,
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
what? And you continued to explain yourself. You said, it's not that I wouldn't want you to date. It's that I'd want to sit down with you before you entered into that relationship. And
Yes.
that moment, I mean, first of all, that shows the care that you have once again for kids of your friends, right? My parents are your friend, but I am their child, and you had enough care for me to say, yeah, there's something we need to talk about before you would jump into that. Why was that your response?
Because I've experienced being in an interracial marriage. I've experienced being friends with people of a different ethnic group, and I've experienced the blowback that comes with that. And not everybody in the United States of America, for the most part, are keen on interracial marriage or interracial dating, and it presents some unique challenges. And
Yeah.
so I wanted you to be aware of all the potential challenges that you were going to face from the standpoint of the way people would think about you, because that's what I've dealt with. That's what Ebony and I've dealt with. I've dealt with it with my friends. The stares when you go to restaurants, the snide remarks that people make. Just very quickly, I'll give you an example of what we've dealt with that you would have had to deal with. We were in Texas visiting with some friends, and their friends had a granddaughter, and we decided to go out to a mall. And the granddaughter, for the first time, when her grandfather put his hand down to grab the little girl's finger, she slapped his hand, and she says no. And so she actually came and she wanted to walk with me and Ebony. So this little blonde-haired little girl wanted to walk through the mall with Ebony and me.
Yeah.
So we did. Mom and Dad were about 4 or 5 paces behind us. And so we walked through the mall. We're in the mall probably an hour and a half, so walking up and down the mall. And we get back to the car, and the mom and dad say, it is just great to go to the mall with you guys. And we're like, what are you talking about? And she goes, Mordecai, every time you walk past someone, they make comments. And I go, what do you mean they make comments? And she said, a couple ladies walked by, and they went, I don't even know what she sees in him. He's not even good looking for one of them. And they just busted up laughing, my friends behind it, because you couldn't have been more insensitive with these comments.
Right.
And so the next person another person came by and says, it is not possible for them to be the parents of that. How did they become the parents of that blonde little girl? That's just genetically not possible. I mean, these were the comments that people were making, not beside us, but when they got by the grandparents.
Yeah.
And so it was just hilarious that I'm thinking, folks, it's just a child. You
Yeah.
should be happy that this child's with someone potentially that loves this child, but no, their biases prevented that from happening. And so it's gotten a little bit better. I say a lot better over time, but we still, when Ebony and I go out to dinner, we can be someplace where people will be staring and I'm thinking, you are super attractive today, babe. And she's like, why? Because that person over there just can't keep their eyes. They can't stop staring at you. And it's not because, it's
Yeah.
because they have a displeasure with this. So the main thing was just trying to make sure you were aware of the, how would you put it? The oddities that would happen to you
Yeah.
if you got involved in an interracial marriage. And so, or dating from that perspective. And so it's just different. People they do treat people differently depending on their biases, their perspectives on life. And I've lived with that my entire life. I've lived with that. I was the first Black engineer my company ever hired. I was one of the few Black engineering students in school. I was one of the few Black students on the college prep curriculum when I was in high school. So it's always been a bit of a challenge. So I just wanted you to be aware of what would happen.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, it's just like everything we're talking about here. If you're aware of how someone's going to behave, then it won't surprise you when they behave that way. If you're aware of how someone's going to respond to a given situation or react in a given situation, you won't be upset about it. If you know in dating that this person gets angry about this particular thing, well, when they get angry about it, it shouldn't surprise you.
Yeah.
You know that. So I think knowledge is very valuable and it can help save us a lot of headaches. But we've got to respect the right that people have to be themselves, and that they can be a good person or a not so good person. It's just their right to be whoever they want to be.
Yeah.
And I can't force them to change. I can't make them change. I can try to persuade them. And so when it came to you, I'm thinking, oh no, let's talk about this, Courtney. Let's make sure you're aware of this before you do this, and then fine. But if you're fully aware and you proceed, fine.
Yeah.
But that's where your dad and I kind of had a departure that day. Yep, I have no problem with you saying that, but let's talk about it first.
Right. Well, just like that child that you were sitting at dinner with, and you turned to the parents and said, let's talk about this later. But I mean, I see what you're saying about the knowledge, and I've gone through things like childbirth is one of those situations where the more you know about what you're going to experience, the better you can respond when you're actually in the situation. And for childbirth, that's a lot of fear of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me? And I know that for me, the more that I read, the more comfortable I felt with, that even though I could never know what I was about to experience, at least I could have an idea, and I could have a little bit, I could respond better. So what you're saying is that by knowing, not living in complete ignorance, but actually kind of gaining knowledge, we can have a better understanding of what might happen. Doesn't mean that it's going to, but what might happen. And so when it does, we can almost internalize it and then respond correctly because it's not a surprise. Yeah.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, we've got one question that we ask all of our guests, and you obviously are a person who finds community very important. You have friends that you have been friends with for many years. So because we know that none of us are supposed to live alone, it's very important that we have that community. Who is it that has helped you along in your journey?
I would say the biggest influence has been my faith in Christ and just learning how Christ teaching me to value people. And in that process, he's always given me adults who encouraged me, who influenced me. Oftentimes, after my parents died and after my grandmother died, it basically became my siblings. And then because I wasn't around my siblings, it became the parents of my friends. And then once that was gone and I moved out here, it became the older employees that I worked with that took a genuine interest in me. They invited me into their families. They let me watch their houses when they were out on vacation or something like that. So there's always been people that God put around me that had a godly influence that reminded me yes, you are different than everybody else, but you're different in a very good way as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't get upset. Don't deviate from what you're doing. You're on a very good path. And so it's always been that way. There's
Mm-hmm.
always been some adults at every church I've been in, at the company. I've only been at one company, but in the company I've worked in, that have always been genuinely interested in helping me see the world the way God would have me to see the world, see myself the way God would have me see myself, and see people and value people more so than anything else. Because as the saying goes, the only thing I can take with me to heaven is people. I can't take anything else. So trying to make sure as many people as I know have experienced the love of God, the grace of God, the unconditional love that God offers, that as it flows from Him to me. Just having people around who believe that same thing,
Mm-hmm.
believe the same way, look alike the same way, we're living the same way, has been more rewarding than I could have ever deserved. To be quite honest, it's been a blessing far beyond my comprehension. Yeah.
Well, we will, like I said, put the link to those books in our show notes. But thank you for the encouragement that you've given us to, first of all, look into our own lives and make sure that we don't have, or that we're looking for healthy relationships. That some things that are just a part of us because of our heritage or because of our family, that's not holding us back from building good, deep, healthy relationships. And thank you for also giving us permission to draw those boundaries and kind of pursue those thoughts that we believe, those things that we believe to our core. It is okay to keep those true and to have those beliefs within you and then draw boundaries reflecting those. So thank you for that permission that you gave us. And thank you for all that you shared with us today.
My pleasure, Courtney. Look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely.